have the great pleasure to be joined in Montreal by someone who knows the city probably better than almost anyone from a music point of view. He's worked on records by the Arcade Fire, Godspeed, You Black Emperor, and Leonard Cohen recently. Please help me in welcoming Howard Bilerman.
Thank you. This is like the closest I'll ever get to talking at the UN, I think. I need to come clean about something before we start.
Please, go for it.
So I've done a lot of interviews, and I've held a lot of microphones, but I've never done an interview holding a microphone before. So yesterday I was like, I got to get my game going. I practiced all day with first with an electric toothbrush, and then a cucumber, and then a badminton racket. So I finally, I think I got there's like the tight grip, and then there's the this grip. So,
but is your arm tired?
Right now, it's ready to go to sleep.
Balanced.
Well, so then that segues into the next thing. Is once I got I figure the mic grip then it's the position. So I Googled a lot of the videos, and I thought Questlove had the best. He's sort of like sunk into the couch nicely. So I've just planned to hold this position for the entire interview.
So we're going to start with you comparing yourself to Questlove.
I would never, ever compare myself to Questlove.
Okay. Why don't we listen to a couple of pieces of music that you've worked on? Because you've worked on more than 400 records.
About that, yeah.
I feel like maybe just to situate people, see kind of the breadth of what you've done. Why don't we just take a listen to this little snippet of stuff? That's a lot of different types of music.
That's a lot of different types of music, yeah.
What's the through line to all of that? Is there something that ties all of this stuff together in your mind?
Well, there's one thing that ties all these things together, which is me. And I spend a lot of time in my mind, so I imagine that's the through line. That's a lot of different kinds of music, and actually, if you say, what is the thing you're most proud of in your 20-something years of recording bands, it's not the number of records I've recorded. It's not the specific few records that I've recorded that resonate with people. It's the fact that I've been able to record so many different kinds of music, in French, in English, in Portuguese, and that I don't have to keep on making the same record over and over again, because I think that would get really boring. And I've been really fortunate to get to work with a lot of people who sound different. And that's the thing I'm most proud of in this all.
When you got your start, was that the aim? Was it to do as many different types of music as possible?
I think the aim when I started was just to be able to keep on doing it and pay rent until the next month and eat, and just to stave off having to get another job for a little longer. And I was really lucky that I had a lot of friends who were in bands. And, there's that shampoo commercial, I told two friends and they told two friends, and then you have 70 people washing their hair that's my career really in a nutshell, which is I recorded one band and they shared a practice space with someone else, and that band said, oh, we need recording. Hey, that doesn't sound that bad, and why? He's not that expensive. And then I just haven't stopped. I haven't stopped recording bands professionally since 1995.
And this all started in Montreal.
This all started in Montreal. The first experience I had recording anything was recording bands live. I had a friend when I was in college who needed his band taped. And I was 17 at the time, so I was underage, and he was 20, and it was in a club here called Fufun Electrique. And I had to be super cool about it because, I didn't want to seem like I was nervous that A, I was underage, and B, this was the punkiest of punk clubs in Montreal. So I arrived with my microphone and tape deck, and I recorded his show. And there was something really intoxicating about it, about just being in that environment. And then eventually I got more equipment and more microphones, and the cassette deck was replaced by a 4-track. And then I bought studio gear. But really, and actually, if you want to talk about through line, like recording bands live for many years greatly informed to me what bands sound like. And by extension, what records should sound like. You know, a band is on stage, they're playing to an audience. There's a direct line of communication between the band on stage and the audience. It's happening in real time. And most records don't reflect that. And so I thought, you know, after seeing so much live music and listening to records and feeling let down by the records, not feeling like they represented the bands, I thought that what's the problem here that needs to be solved? So the problem that needs to be solved is when people make records, I thought, they need to think of it as a live performance delayed by space and time. So you're in a studio, you're singing, you're playing music, and you can't see your audience. And your audience won't hear this for 6 months. But you really are, you know, throwing a message in a bottle, and the bottle washes up on shore 6 months later, and someone hears it. But you need to play with the same sort of intensity and the desire to communicate something when you're in a studio as you would if you were on stage playing for people. And that lesson was learned from years of just showing up at clubs and watching bands play and getting to record them.
Tell me about Montreal back around that time when you first started going out. I mean, what was the scene like? I think a lot of people think about Godspeed You Black Emperor and that it was this magical sort of time of unbridled creativity. Was that the way it felt?
My involvement precedes Godspeed by about 8 years. So when I first started paying attention to bands in Montreal, you know, I grew up listening to all the classics, listening to Rolling Stones and Neil Young and the Beatles. And then around 1986 or 87, I started paying attention to bands from Montreal, Sons of the Desert and 3 O'Clock Train, and other bands from Canada, like the Cowboy Junkies, and bands from here, like the Asexuals. And I realized these bands are just as good as, I mean, they make me feel just as good listening to this music as any of the records that I grew up listening to. But these bands are here in my backyard. But the infrastructure wasn't there. There weren't really that many clubs to play in. There weren't really any artist-run recording studios. There were a lot of commercial high-end recording studios that you needed a record deal to be able to afford to record in. And there were a lot of people who had things in their basement, but there wasn't really like what we have now at the Hotel Tatango and studio like Break Glass in Montreal. There wasn't professional artist-run facilities that would be sympathetic to artists. So then, you know, 87, 88, 89, I really got knee-deep in the bands that came from here. And there was something just really immediate about being able to see a band and then know that they're from your hometown and converse with them and become friends with them and see them get bigger and wait for their next record to come out. But the city was financially depressed. This neighborhood, Old Montreal, was like you just didn't want to be in this neighborhood when the sun went down. Half the buildings were vacant. The businesses had just left. It was really.
I guess this idea of the referendum was kind of hanging over the city a little bit.
Yeah, kind of messed stuff up for a bit. But
For those
also,
who don't know what the referendum is, can you kind of describe that? And
yeah, the referendum was basically Quebec, which is a province in Canada. There's a portion of the population that believes in sovereignty, that believes that Quebec should be its own nation. And so the referendum was a public vote. I think the first referendum was in 76, and then another one was in 94. Basically just a simple question: should Quebec separate from Canada? And it really made a lot of people antsy. And anyone who was looking for some sort of financial stability just got up and moved to Toronto. I'm really happy that my parents chose to stay here, and that I grew up here, and I grew up with multiculturalism. And for me, the economic instability of this town opened the door for me to be able to rent a 2,000 square foot loft for $800 and learn about what recording was. And those opportunities don't exist anymore in this city. like that. So for me, I was super fortunate,
Your first recording studio is Mom and Pop? Is it Mom and Pop
Mom and
Recording
Pop Sounds,
Studio?
which was a
Mom and
tribute
Pop
to the
Sounds.
fact that it literally was in my parents' basement. And it lasted one recording session. My parents were really generous with me, both with lending me some cash to buy some recording equipment and then being like, hey, can I set up a recording studio in your basement? And they were like, okay, at least he wants to do something. And so, we'd record in the basement and then realized, oh, fuck, the drums sound great in the garage with all the concrete. So let's put the drums in the garage and we'll put the rest of the band in the basement. And then my dad was like, we need to we'll just park it on the street. It's fine. And then the kind of straw was like, they had gone to Costco, I think, and they'd filled up the cupboards with food, and then they came home and like the band was in the den snacking on all the food they just bought, and my dad pulled me aside and was like, we need to find another space. And it was easy. It literally was easy. And it was just, I tried to find some people to partner with to share the rent, and that's what we did. I had a friend who had a loft, just right near here actually, on Lagosha Chair. The building is gone now. They tore down the building. And he had this beautiful loft, 1,800 square foot loft, and he was in a band and needed to record. And he knew that I had recording equipment. So he's like, listen, I'll make you a deal. You have this recording equipment, and you just got kicked out of your parents' basement, and I have a band, and we need to record, but we have a space. So why don't you move in your stuff for a month, and for 2 weeks, I'll record my band with your equipment, and then for the other 2 weeks, you can record all the bands that you have to record. And I stayed there for 4 years. And the only reason I left was because the city had condemned the building because the slumlord refused to put fire escapes. The building didn't have fire escapes, and the slumlord's like, I'm not going to do it. And the city was like, put like little stickers on everyone's door saying you have to leave. Like, this building is unsafe. There was a weird series of break-ins, like armed robbery in the building. Our neighbors were DJs and like got broken into in the middle of the night, and it was just like, I think it's time to leave.
Where'd you go?
Where did I go? I went to a loft on Saint Laurent just for a very short period of time. And then Godspeed, this was I guess 1998 or 99, Godspeed had a practice space on Van Horn Street, which they called the Hotel to Tango, which they were running shows out of and rehearsing there. There were at that point, all of the bars you had to pay to play. So if you wanted to do a show, you'd pretty much lose money unless you sold out the show. You'd have to pay the sound person. You'd have to rent the room. They would charge you like $5 per towel. You want lights? That's an extra $100. And it was like it's like a make-work project for clubs. It wasn't, it had nothing to do with the community. And so Terry and Ephraim had this loft called the Hotel to Tango, and then they heard that I was looking for a space. It was kind of the similar situation where they're like, you have all this equipment, we want to actually set up a studio here, so why don't we do that? Why don't we put up a bunch of walls and make a recording studio? That was in we think we opened that in 1999, and then we stayed there for about 9 years.
Why don't we take a listen to a side project of Godspeed?
Yeah, sure.
This is Silver Mount Zion. What are the challenges of recording a band like Godspeed and their various projects where, we listened to that kind of mega mix earlier, and a lot of it's very like band oriented. You're capturing the band. It seems like this in particular might provide odd situations that you don't run into normally.
So I realized like a few years into recording bands that making a record is a dance really between what's good for the band and what's good for you as a sound engineer, producer. So bands are used to performing together. They rehearse in a jam space together. They go on stage. Everyone plays at the exact same time together. And so when they go make a record, they should feel most comfortable doing that. You know, a show isn't, let's play the drums first, and then we'll do the bass on stage, and then the guitars, and the audience will, you know, understand. But that's not how records are made. That's not how shows are played, so that shouldn't be how records are made. So a band is really comfortable, I think, playing together and being able to see each other and hear each other in the room sometimes, as opposed to headphones. That's a fucking disaster for a sound engineer. Especially a band like that where you have acoustic instruments, you have strings, you have an acoustic bass, a cello, 2 violins. If those people are in the same room with a drummer, the drums are probably going to be louder in all the string mics than the strings are. But I also learned that I didn't want to be the person who asserted that it needed to be good for me to record your band. You know, I can't work with this. Like, I'd seen enough sound checks, actually, where the sound person would be like, hey, can you turn down your guitar? And would say it so condescendingly, like, look, this is all about me. So the only way to survive, really, if you're going to proceed saying, I want the band to be as comfortable as possible, is to just learn how to make it work. And that involves a shitload of mic technique, from the choosing of which mics you use to where you place them, how you baffle people, which angles you face things. And so when I listen to that and when I listen to your question, that's really what I think about is the culmination of a lot of learning and technique. And just making concessions, you know. Sometimes you're recording a band and they're all playing live in a room and you just think the drums aren't going to sound as good as I want them to be. Is that the end of the world? Would it be better for the drums to sound amazing but the drummer to be so uncomfortable that the playing is awful? No. So really, I think it's important to learn how much you need to make it about you and how much you just need to let the band do their thing and just stand back and as if you were taking a picture of them, really.
That particular song was recorded at Hotel to Tango, I believe.
That particular song started at the Loft on Saint Laurent and got finished at the hotel and mixed at the hotel. It was one of the first things in the original Hotel to Tango.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the original.
Well, let's see. The original Hotel to Tango was a 2,000 square foot loft with wood floors and wood ceilings that was an amazing space which had the misfortune of being above a garage. And the extra misfortune was that the person who ran the garage owned the building. So they were uncompromising in the fact that from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m., they were going to work, which is fine, I understand. So from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., you heard and it just sailed through the floor. So we couldn't work until 5 p.m. And by that time, enough exhaust from all the cars that they're working on had accumulated in the top floor of the loft. And maybe that's the secret to all of those recordings. It's yet to be discerned, really. But so it was a bit of a flawed space, but it was originally $893 a month. And you know, what you pay rent directly correlates to how much you have to charge your clients to record there. So again, you know, in the late 90s, we were paying nothing to rent this space. And it meant that we could charge, you know, not that much to record, which really meant that we recorded a lot of interesting things. Because for me, like, generally most of the big budget stuff that I've worked on isn't that interesting. It's always the people who are like, this is our first record and we're still sort of finding out what we sound like. And, you know, can you guide us through it and help us find who we are as a band? Those are the really interesting projects, but you don't get those projects unless you can charge people affordable rates.
I think for a lot of people, Montreal and Hotel to Tango takes on some sort of mythic quality. Did it feel like you were doing something important at the time, or was it just like, I'm just here?
Well, it was an exciting time. You know, it was an exciting time to, you know, I grew up when I was 17, 18, 19, I listened to a lot of Fugazi, and I loved that band. And I love that band not just for the music, but I love that band for everything they stood for the fact that they would do live shows for under $10, for the fact that, you know, I went to this shitty record store here that everything was marked up on, and a Fugazi record was $20 or something, and it had a little sticker on it saying, postage paid, $7.99 from Discord Records. You know, it was just like, we're going to do this on our own terms. And it really opened my eyes up to how you can participate completely on your own terms. And then Godspeed did that. Godspeed in 1995, 96, 97 played around the world, became interviewed on, you know, humongous magazines, refused to send out press photos or bios, did it completely on their own terms. And it was really exciting to be aligned with that, even tangentially. So did I think we at the hotel, or did I think I was doing anything exciting or worth talking about 15, 20 years later? Not really, but I knew I was extremely proud of my friends, and I got to see firsthand that you can do things on your own terms and make a living, and that you don't have to make concessions. So that felt very exciting.
Let's take a listen to another band that kind of appears in that list of things that you've worked on a little bit higher than others. This is Arcade Fire with Wake Up.
I have to tell you, just an aside, as you don't see this, but Todd has a playlist, and it's very distracting because it's called Howard Bilerman Short, which I feel a little self-conscious about.
It's the short version of the longer.
I know, but it's just like, you know, it
We're
just
not
plays
trying
into a
to
whole
make-
bunch of insecurity, really.
Okay. During the next song, I'll change the name of the playlist to Howard Bilerman
Howard
Tall.
Bilerman Average, I think,
Average
really would be the,
okay.
what you need to call it.
So, who was playing drums on that record?
That's Arlen Thompson from Wolf Parade, and me doubling him. We'd recorded Arlen playing it, and then we played the song a bunch live, and I wanted to throw myself on it, so I threw myself on it.
How'd you end up playing drums for the Arcade Fire?
I ended up playing drums for them. They'd come to record a 7-inch with me, that song and Power Out. And then they had, the previous version of the band had imploded, and they had lost their drummer. Quite dramatically, I understand. I think they broke up on stage, is the story that I understand. So they came to record this record, but they also had all these shows booked. And so in the middle of recording, Wynn was like, listen, do you know anyone who plays drums? And they were really great to hang out with, and I liked the songs. And so I was like, I'll think about it. And like that night, I was like, should I do it? Should I do it? And I was like, dear Wynn, the only person I can think of who would play drums would be me. And he's like, great. So here are our shows. Are you free? Can you do these shows? And then it just sort of like snowballed. And then there were more shows booked based on those shows. And then there were more songs to record. And then like a year later, we had Funeral recorded. The 7-inch never came out. The version of Power Out got re-recorded. Yeah, that's it.
The interesting thing to me about that record is obviously it's like an indie rock classic, but the influences of all of the people in that group are just about as far from indie rock as you could imagine.
Yeah. Well, I think the most interesting music in the whole history of music, I think the most interesting music is when something meets something else and births a new thing. I don't really like for me, the records I like to listen to, I don't like to be like, oh, this sounds just like this. You know, I kind of like to scratch my head and be like, there's this, and this in it. You wouldn't think it would work, but it works. That's crazy. So I think that's that's where sort of special records come from. Is that complete? It's like how do we make all these things fit together?
Seems like Win and the rest of the band are pretty hands-on in the studio, and especially with the production side of things. I mean, I guess they're credited as producers on almost all the records.
I mean, everyone could have produced that record, and certainly everyone did have a hand in sort of the democracy of like, well, we should do this, we should try this, we should try that. But definitely there was, I mean, in the same way that all of those people are multi-instrumentalists, they all have really great ears for production and things like that.
What do you remember about those sessions? Like, what really stands out to you as being...
I mean, on a technical level, what's cool about that record is that we'd go play some shows, and then the studio would be really booked, and they'd be like, okay, look, we have Saturday and Sunday free at the studio, so let's go record one song. And then a few weeks later, it was like, oh, we have 5 days. Let's record 2 more songs. And because of it, like sometimes I would just use the mic setup for whoever just left. Like I would just leave the drum mics up and then slide my drums in and record. So I think every single song on that record is recorded completely differently. Sometimes the drums have like 10 mics. Sometimes there's 1 mic on the drums. Sometimes it's 3 mics on the drums. Sometimes the bass has a DI. Sometimes it doesn't have a DI. Different vocal mics used for each song. And I think it really sort of played into the result of it, which is that the record kind of sounds a bit like a good mixtape. You know, it doesn't necessarily sound like 10 of the same songs recorded in the same place at the same time. There's some movement in it. So I think that wasn't the intention to do it, but the fact that we had to take 2 days here and 2 days there whenever there was a hole in the studio calendar sort of forced the issue of having to do it that way and having there be not much consistency between the way each of those songs were recorded.
You kind of fell into being the drummer for Arcade Fire, basically. It was like shows, okay, I'm here now. You left the band at a certain point. Like, what happened, and why did you decide to do that?
Well, it wasn't... there's that joke. I don't actually think it's a joke. I think it's true. But apparently someone asked John Lennon, do you think Ringo's the best drummer in the world? And John Lennon's answer was, Ringo isn't even the best drummer in the Beatles. And so I feel like I was probably the 3rd best drummer in the Arcade Fire. Maybe even the 4th best drummer in Arcade Fire, which the band of 6 people is not great numbers, really. You're kind of floating at the bottom. And I don't know, I kind of felt like when I joined that band, it's like, when the coach of a sports team gets fired and there's like 10 games left in the season, and they're like, well, we don't have time to hire the coach for next season because no one's available. So we'll just get either the assistant coach or whoever takes care of the locker room, and he'll just coach the rest of the season. And it's sort of like known that like it's kind of not going to be the guy who's going to be the coach next year. And so my position in that band was kind of always like a sort of stand-in. Like I wasn't sworn in. It was just like, he'll just stand in, and then just circumstantially the band took off. But most of the songs on Funeral were written before I joined the band. So really I was just learning someone else's drum parts. We wrote the song Rebellion while I was in the band. But then once it was all recorded and we'd sort of come down to the other side of the hill of having this record finished, and we started to practice, and it just, I don't know, there's something, it just didn't feel like there was chemistry there. It was sort of frustrating. And so Win and I had a lot of talks, and about 3 or 4 talks about like, well, what do you think we should do? And eventually we just decided like, you should probably find a drummer, because shit's gonna get out of hand really quickly. And I don't know, I don't necessarily know that. That's the sort of the medium length answer of it. But I have to say, like, I don't think I have the constitution to be in a band.
Why do you say that?
At least at that time, I just had these like incredibly uncompromising morals or beliefs about how you should proceed. And I would get these like weird fight or flight responses about things, like just stupid things like we were supposed to play this festival. It was a 9-band festival, and we'd signed the contract. On the contract, it said your 5th headliner, which means headliner 1, 2, 3, 4. There, we were there. And we kind of like talked about it. I was like, well, it's kind of shitty. Like, well, at least it's not in the middle of the afternoon. Like, sun will kind of be going down. And so we agreed to do it. And then, like a week before the festival, they added another band, and the band was bigger than Arcade Fire. So they were like, they became the 5th headliner, and we got bumped down to the 6th head. And like everyone was kind of like, well, whatever. And I was just like, I would literally fight or flight response of like, no, this isn't right. You can't just be pushed around like that, you know. And it would just put me in a bad mood for days. You know, it's like saying this now. It's kind of like, that's a little strange. But like, I really felt like you're either in this together and you stand up for yourself, and you do it without any compromises. Because every band that I ever dreamt of being in seemed that they proceeded that way. Fugazi and The Clash, they seemed to just do everything uncompromising and not let anyone do anything that would fuck them around. And that's kind of the band I wanted to be in and so I just felt like I couldn't really roll with things, you know. There's a bunch of other silly little examples too. But ultimately, this is I'll tell you this little silly example, and then we can move on, which is that, or we can just talk about this all day.
On these.
There was this magazine from Toronto wanted to do a cover story about Arcade Fire, and so they were sending a journalist and the photographer from Toronto. And while they were en route, it comes out that this magazine has a policy of only putting one person on the front cover of the magazine. And so, you know, we're kind of bummed. Like, you know, it's like we're a band. We're a band. So we put Win on the cover, but like we're a band. Like I was kind of bummed. Richie was kind of bummed. We talked about it, and like we each saw the pros and cons of it, right? We saw like, well, it'd be good for the band to have this cover story, you know, and like, but like, oh, there's something kind of yucky about, you know, about it. So we talked about it, and Win had called the magazine, and the magazine said, no, like, this is our policy. This is our only policy. And I said something kind of self-righteous, something like, well, do you think they would tell you too that they would only put one member of the band on the cover? Like, why don't we proceed with this interview the way we want to be treated? And there was a long fight, and then the journalist came. Sorry, it wasn't a fight. I don't mean to fight.
Mood when the journalist
Yeah,
came.
well, that's part of the story. It wasn't a fight. It was just, everyone was very respectful of everyone's point of view. It was just a situation we found ourselves in, you know. Didn't really know how to proceed because we wanted to do the interview, but we wanted to do it on our terms. So the journalist and photographer arrive, and Win is like on the phone with the publisher or something like that. And finally they give in. They're like, fine, we will break with tradition and we will let the whole band be on the cover of this magazine. But like the whole thing just put me in a horrible mood. Like literally it felt like this is a life and death situation, which it wasn't, you know, but just like, that's what I mean about just not feeling like I didn't have the constitution to be in a band. So then to add insult to injury, the interview comes out, we're on the cover of the magazine, and the journalist writes, the intro is, when I showed up to the Arcade Fire loft, they're arguing about where each of the members should be sitting in the band photo. I was like, no, we weren't. We were arguing about your stupid magazine only wanting to put one person on the cover. Like, why would you? And that put me in a horrible mood for 2 days about, you know, like, well, we're never doing interviews again, you know? And that really isn't the best way to become a successful band. You know, I see now you do need to sort of just roll with it and make some concessions.
Do you find that it's easier to, I mean, you talked earlier about how being a producer and engineer, you need to kind of pull yourself out of it some ways, let the band be as comfortable as possible, and it's not about the way that you want it to sound necessarily. Well, have you found a little bit of...
No, that's... when I'm recording a band, it's their record. It's their thing. If I make it my thing, I'm not doing them... You know, it cannot be overstated how important Steve Albini is to independent music to recordings in the past 25 years. Because Steve Albini politicized recording. Steve Albini politicized do-it-yourself. Steve Albini politicized being an independent band. And Steve Albini insisted that if you're going to record a band, you must be sympathetic to that band. You must be in service to that band, and you must treat them as if they were the most important part of the equation. It cannot be about you. So when I record a band, it's about the band. It's not about me. When I'm in a band, it is about me. And, you know, I'm there, we're all up there together on stage. So it should be about us. You know, I had this realization like, I don't know, a decade ago, that if bands stopped playing music, bands stopped writing music and performing, there would be so many people out of work. Clubs would go bankrupt, magazines would go bankrupt, agents, publicists, managers, touring companies, record labels, press people, they would all be out of a job. So that, to me, intimates that the most important part of the equation, the center of the cog of the wheel is the band. But the way that the industry has manifested itself, the band is not treated like the most important cog in the wheel. So really, I feel like if anyone is going to be in a band, and if I'm going to be in a band, there needs to be some sort of acknowledgement that like all of this is happening because of the band. That's sort of, and I still believe that. So I don't think that I'm able to remove myself from it in the way that you're saying.
Why don't we play a song from someone who's maybe eclipsed this deal that you're talking about a tiny bit? This is Leonard Cohen with You Want It Darker.
Really, the applause for that one should go to an engineer named Michael Chavez from LA and Adam Cohen, who produced that. I recorded the choir that you hear on that record, but those guys produced it, and Michael recorded the rest of it and engineered it and did a fantastic job. The record sounds amazing.
The record's coming out Friday, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
This week sometime.
Yeah. But you met Leonard Cohen years before, actually, this came out.
Yeah, I mean, Leonard was born here and lived here for a bit, and like, it's kind of like in the same way that you would like go to the forest and eventually one day you see a moose, you know? It's like anyone who lives in Montreal long enough at the time would see Leonard Cohen walking on Saint Laurent or having breakfast somewhere. And so I like 20 years ago was like, I want to record Leonard Cohen. And so I wrote this really poetic letter, and everyone from Montreal knows where Leonard Cohen lives. Like, it's like, that's where Leonard Cohen lives. And so I wrote this really poetic letter, like, you know, dear Leonard, I have a recording studio, and I don't know, it's ridiculous. I would be so embarrassed if I saw this letter now.
You were writing poetry to Leonard Cohen.
I was writing poetry to Leonard Cohen, which is really the worst possible thing you could do. And, you know, so I wrote this letter, and I made a little CD of some songs, and I slipped it through his mailbox, and he didn't call. And then a few years later, I was like, I think my poetry's better, so I'm going to write another letter. And we've moved studios, so this is like, we now have, and some of the bands that I've recorded, actually, people have heard, maybe even he's heard. So I wrote another letter to Leonard Cohen and made another CD, and I slipped it through his mailbox, and he didn't call. Now, the funny thing is, having been to Leonard Cohen's house and having gone to the other side of that door, there's a fucking mountain of letters on the other side of that door. Like, and he probably has like a shovel by that door, just shoveling them into the backyard. Yeah, but then I was like, well, whatever. You know, there's a lot of other people to record. One of them being Vic Chestnutt. Amazing record and an amazing person. And Vic loved Leonard Cohen so much. And it's like, Vic, you want to see where Leonard lives? And we drove, that's where Leonard Cohen lives. Vic, do you want to have breakfast where Leonard eats? That's where. And Vic we just, talked about our favorite songs, and he kept on making Leonard Cohen references, and Leonard Cohen should record here. It's like, I know. And so then the review of that record came out. Said, this record that Vic did at the Hotel Tango with these people is one of the best records he's done in a long time. Someone should get Leonard Cohen to that studio. And then about 12 hours later, an email comes into my email account that says, from Leonard Cohen, can I see your studio, Leonard? So of course this is a practical joke from Vic Chestnutt, right? Because Vic also got sent the article of this review. So I was like, all right, Leonard Cohen. So I asked him some skill testing questions, which only he would know the answer to, which is, we have this mutual friend, and I went to school with his son. So I was like, what's the last name of this person? And then we have another friend, his cousin. I recorded his cousin, and his uncle, and he lives in New York. For bonus points, what's his name? I'd be like, all right, Vic, go ahead. And then 4:30 a.m. the next morning, an email comes with huge bold letters, and it just says, DeSalvio, lack. I was like, fuck me, it's Leonard Cohen. Holy shit. So, it's quite an honor, blah, blah, blah. We're recording tomorrow at 4 o'clock. He said, I'll be there at 4:30. And so we're recording Silver Mount Zion at the time. And, we're all just looking at the clock. And it's moving slow motion. And then it hits, it's 4:30, as if you'd set your alarm to say 4:30, the doorbell rings. And we all look at each other we hadn't, who's going to answer the door? No, we didn't even figure this out. So I was like, I'll answer the door. And so I go to the door and I open it, and there he is, his suit and cap. And he says, if you're busy, I can come back. I was like, dude, if you wanted salt, I would scrape it off my arm somehow and give you salt. Please come in. And he stayed, he came. I stayed for an hour and a half, and he was just watching us track. And then he said, would it be okay if I came back sometime? And this is this is before Comeback Leonard Cohen. This is my agent stole all my money, and I'm in Montreal just drawing art and reading and writing Leonard Cohen. This isn't third act Leonard Cohen yet. And so I said, yeah, sure, come back anytime. And then I was like, this is weird, because he didn't really say why he was coming. So I'm just going to put it out there. It's like, Leonard, I'd like to propose an experiment. What is the experiment? I think you should try coming to record a song here with all the people that you saw at the studio. And I made what I thought was a convincing case for it, and said, it's just an experiment. In science, if you have a science experiment, you combine a bunch of things, and 9 times out of 10, they explode in your face, and you're like, we will not do that again. And then 1 time out of 10, you find a cure to some disease. It's just an experiment. So if this works, that's great. And if it doesn't work, no one will hear it. And he didn't answer. But he came back on Tuesday, and I was like, at this point I was perplexed. I was like, well, and there was never any discussion about it. And then he came back, the world tour. He had this amazing comeback. It was the first time I'd ever seen him live. I saw him at Place des Arts, and it was amazing. It was truly incredible. And in the middle of that, he visited a 3rd time. And then he said, about that experiment, one day. I was like, okay, okay, one day. But at that point, it didn't even matter, I got to hang out with Leonard Cohen and see how articulate he was, and how hilarious he was, and how generous he was. He never made me feel less than him. He always gave me room. He listened. He answered. He asked me questions about my family. It was just wonderful. That was the exceptional thing that came of it.
How did this recording come to be then?
So then I met a bunch of people associated with him, including one of his booking agents, who then suggested that his son, Adam, get in touch with me for recording. And Adam and I started recording a record together, and we had these amazing talks about music and about music production and about what records should sound like. And we'd recorded a bunch of songs, and he would fly in from LA. And then he texted me and said, hey, is the studio free Monday to record a song of my dad's? And I was like, well, that's an interesting choice that Adam is going to do a cover of one of his dad's songs. Like, sure, of course the studio is free. And then, he's like, well, how many sets of headphones do you have? It's this choir, the Shar Shemaim choir. And I was like, wow. And then sort of everything came into focus, and I realized, oh, you mean record a song of your father's at the studio. And then that's what happened. The choir showed up, and we recorded one song, and then the choir came back twice. We recorded another song. And the best part about the experience is like I've recorded like 400, 450 records. And at the beginning, you really just have to put on your game face and be like, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. The band's paying to be there, and they don't want to see someone be like, you're just like, and if there's feedback somewhere, if something's not sounding good, you're just like, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. And then eventually, you make so many records that you literally are like, I know what I'm doing. Like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Oh, we're doing that? I know what I'm doing. And so it was really refreshing to have this session come about and have the only thing that was going on in my head being, don't fuck it up, don't fuck it up, don't fuck it up, don't fuck it up, don't fuck it up. For like 6 hours, just that was on repeat. Don't fuck it up, don't fuck it up. This is important, don't fuck it up. Hopefully I didn't fuck it up.
You didn't fuck it up. There was a huge choir that was in the studio. What are the challenges of recording a choir? I assume the mic placement just takes hours to get right with something like that.
What I learned a long, long time ago in recording is that if you take too long setting up mics, people get fucking bummed. Because they're like, people are coming to perform. In some cases, they're spending their own money. In some cases, it's a lot of money. They have limited amount of time. And they show up, and if you're spending like 3 hours trying to get the perfect drum sound, when their adrenaline is like waning, now they need to eat, now they're tired, and they're bummed that the 4 hours has passed and nothing has happened, that's like a shitty situation for everybody. So what I learned a long time ago was just kind of get everything in the ballpark of good, because once they start doing what they need to do, they're going to take about another hour to get good doing what they're doing. And you can just tinker in all that time. It doesn't have to be, things don't have to sound perfect. The mics don't have to be perfectly placed. And then you flick a switch and you go, now go. Things are very fluid. And worst case situation is things aren't perfectly set up and they do an amazing take. Well, you have an amazing take. Great. So it's not recorded perfectly. So you won't win a Grammy for the recording of that take. Big deal. So that the choir came, I'd set up the mics before. There was an MS mid-side mic in the middle. There were room mics on the side. The thing about recording a choir is you don't want to hear individual voices. You want it to sound like one instrument. The same way that, a piano, you want it to sound like a piano. You don't want it to sound like a bunch of different strings. A choir, you want it just to sound like one mass. And so that involves mic placement. That involves person placement to the microphones. That involves the choir master, Roe, who was amazing on this recording, being like, back up, come forward, quiet, loud. He would point to people like the choir was singing and he'd just be standing and be like he was tuning a guitar, like strings on a guitar. He'd be like, you're flat, sharp. Like, I don't know how, it's like laser ears to be like, that guy is not singing well. And so really it was kind of a breeze because all I had to do was just like use the right microphones, get the right levels, and then just make sure I was recording when we needed to be recording, which sounds like an oversimplification, but really it isn't.
I guess it's much easier in the digital age, but you do a lot with tape through the years.
Yeah,
right?
For sure. We started, I only touched Pro Tools in 2008. So there was like 300 records done before that. exclusively to tape. Half-inch 16-track, 24-track 2-inch. And that taught me so much, because when you record to tape, you have very limited means, and you need to get things to sound good without needing much to any intervention later. So everything that gets recorded you have to be content enough with it that if you couldn't do anything to it in terms of the sound or in terms of the performance, then you can live with it. And recording to tape is very front-end loaded to performance, which ties directly into what I think records should sound like, which is performances to people. So, there's the age-old quote of limitations make better art. What does that mean? I believe it's true, first of all. And I believe that recording to tape embraces the fact that you have limitations and the records are better because of it. That's not to say you can't record to computer the exact same way, but somehow you don't. So like when I was a kid, when you'd get a box of crayons, it would have 8 colors in it, They've just as much as you need to make a drawing. And you'd make drawings. Then when my brother was a kid, a few years later, they'd be like boxes of 24 crayons, and you have 24 colors to play with. And now, like, I have a son, and I'm looking at Toys R Us, and there's like barrels of 1,000 different colors of crayons. So what happens is you have art that has way too many colors in it, colors that clash way too much. And to me, that's what recording on computer enables. The records to me, they sound a bit overbaked because you can have an infinite number of tracks, so you're not questioning arrangement while you're recording. Like, do we need to triple track the tambourine? When you're recording to tape, you can't. You'll run it. It's like if you triple track the tambourine, I'm sorry, band, there's no lead vocals on this record. And then you have... Sounds fantastic. And the Grammy Award for Best Tambourine goes to... but the other thing is, in Pro Tools, you have the ability to have 5 different plugins on each track. When I started recording, outboard gear was corrective. If like, oh shit, the dynamics are a little crazy on that, you'd put a compressor on it. Oh, if we've been recording this record for 6 months and all the high end is gone from the snare because the tape has just been played to shit, we'll use the EQ, we'll put back some high end. Now it's this weird thing where you're forced with all these options. You're forced with, you have 1,000 crayons. Your impulse is to use them. I didn't learn how to record like that. I learned how to record with very, to me, limited means recording to tape taught me what punk rock was. Punk rock is not an aesthetic. Punk rock is not a sound. Punk is doing the most you can with what you have. And so that's true if you're a band and this is as much talent as you have, or these are the best instruments we could afford. It's doing the best, absolute best you can with what you have. And trying to make a record on 16 tracks, you have to be implicated in every decision from the beginning. There's no like, oh, we'll fix it later. And so I think it's an incredible way to be present in recordings. Reels, a 2-inch tape now is $500 for 33 minutes of 2-inch tape. If you told a band you can only afford 2 reels of tape, you can only have 66 minutes of audio recorded. They can't do 12 takes of a song and then comp them together later and figure it out. They literally have to do a take and say, that was pretty good, I think we can beat it. Should we keep it? No, tape over it. And it's gone. And then they get one that's really good. And then if you're lucky, you have the luxury to say, let's try and beat that take. And if you do, you use that take and you erase over the other one.
Your dedication to tape runs pretty deep. Like, I think, is it true that Hotel to Tango is one of the few places in Canada, or at least Montreal, where you can buy tape?
Yeah, we supply, I import tape from the States from 2 tape companies. One is called ATR, and one is called RTM, Recording the Masters. It was an offshoot of MTech and BASF. And we use tape, and I wanted to have a steady stream of tape. So I made a deal with both of the tape manufacturers. And like, look, you send it to upstate New York. I will drive across the border. I will bring the tape across. I will use it, and if anyone else in Montreal needs to buy tape, just send them to me, and I'll sell them tape.
I think the tapes in our studio, actually upstairs.
I have sold you tape.
Yes, are bought from you. Thank you.
Which might be the only reason I'm here today. I'm not sure.
Why don't we play another tune? Do you want to? Sorry, go ahead.
No, you.
I was wondering if you could maybe introduce this track. You spent a little bit of time in Mali.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to introduce, I guess, the idea of what you were doing there? And maybe we can listen to the track.
Okay, so there's this guy named Basekou Koyote, who is a legend in Mali. He's the sort of the godfather of the electric ngoni. Ngoni is kind of the predecessor of the banjo, and Basekou electrified it and then made a formation of bands where you have the bass ngoni, the tenor ngoni, and two lead ngonis. And so Basekou had some time off in Montreal in between shows, and they needed to record a song. And so through Josh Dolgan, so-called, they ended up at our studio, and it was amazing. It's really dangerous to enjoy the music you're recording, because then you sort of take a side and you sort of get a little lazy. But boy, did I enjoy that, the music that was coming out.
It was Jamak who?
Close.
I tried. You said, when you like a band, when you like the music a lot, actually, you might get a tiny bit lazy by accident.
Yeah.
Did that happen here? I mean...
No, well, because there was so this was actually recorded in Mali. So there was a huge extraneous circumstance that brought a whole other level to this record, which is I got stuck in a coup d'etat while recording this record.
As you do.
Yeah, but you know what? As far as coup d'etats go, if you're going to get stuck in a coup d'etat, that coup d'etat was an excellent coup d'etat to get stuck in, because really there wasn't that much bloodshed. Let me go back. Basekou asked me to come to Mali to record his record. After we recorded some songs at the hotel, he said, Howard, you come to Mali to record? And I was like, fuck yeah, I'll come to Mali to record. Absolutely. And I didn't even think about what it meant to go to Africa at all. And so I started reading, malaria? They haven't cured malaria yet? Fuck. All right, so I got a bunch of shots, and my yellow fever shot and this shot, but I'm kind of freaking out, I'm going to get malaria. I'm absolutely going to get malaria. What have I gotten myself into? And then there was a bunch of Al-Qaeda kidnappings in the north of Mali. We were in the south.
I would have been a lot more worried about the...
Well, it was far enough away, and Basekou is also personal friends of the president of Mali. He played the president of Mali's wedding, and I was like, our entourage is gonna be fine. We'll be fine. So I bought my ticket, and now I'm in the airport, and I'm at the gate, and my phone rings, and it's my mom, and my mom's like, "Did you know that? I thought Timbuktu was just an imaginary, he went to Timbuktu." He's like, "Do you realize there is a Timbuktu and it's next to Mali? You're going to Timbuktu." And she was pleading, please don't go. Please don't go. I was like, "Mom, look, this is an opportunity of a lifetime. I need to go, and we're going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Basekou is personal friends with the president. It'll be fine." And we fly, and we land, and I bought the thickest mosquito repellent you could possibly. It was pure DEET, and I was oh, they don't you must dress in white. I was dressed head to toe in white, it looked ridiculous. I had a little safari hat on, and I landed in Mali, and I was like, this is amazing. And we stood in line waiting for customs, and then there was Basekou, and Basekou was talking to the border guard, and he's like. And I'm and he's does this, and suddenly I don't have to stand in line for customs. I didn't even give my passport to anyone. And then I'm in a car with Basekou, and we're being driven to Basekou's house. And I was like, this is amazing. The air smells amazing. It's so touching, and the people are so warm. And I was like, this is exactly where I want to be right now. We started making the record, and everything was great. And then we had lunch in the studio, outside in the studio. The front of the studio was like they had a bunch of picnic tables set up, and we're eating. And I was like, fireworks. I wonder what they're celebrating here in Mali. And then the record label guy, Jay, who's down there, runs out. He's pale as a ghost, and he runs out with his cell phone. He's like, Jens called. Jens was the photographer who came down. He said, he's in the city square. The military has taken over the city square. They're firing machine guns in the air. They've started a coup d'etat. And I was like, just had this sinking feeling. I was like, the first thing I was like, looked at my phone. I was like, okay, my parents will wake up in 8 hours. If everything goes as everything normally goes, my father will start reading the news. Maybe not the top line item of the news, but probably the second line item of the news is coup d'etat in Bamako, Mali. And it's just this horrible sinking feeling like, fuck, my parents were right. You know? That feeling of like, they didn't know why they were right, but they were right.
Just for context, how old were you at this point?
I was a fully grown adult. I was like 40.
You're still worried about your parents.
I was.
All right, I'm sorry.
It's hard to explain.
I apologize.
But kudos to them, because they were actually kind of right? So there's a coup d'etat. So just to be clear, Baseku's friend, the president, who I was like, I'll be fine, friends with the president, has now gone into hiding.
Yeah.
No one knows where the president is. There's some talk that he got snuck out by the American embassy, that he was on a plane to America. Military had taken over the streets. There was a curfew. I was petrified to leave Baseku's house. Everyone was like, should we go to the studio? I was like, we can't go to the studio. There's a curfew. And Baseku was like, it's fine. And I was like, it's not fine. There's a coup d'etat. There's a curfew. And then after like a day, I was like, we should probably just go make the record. And so we drive on the back streets, and we work all day. And I was like, the airports were closed. You couldn't leave Mali. Like, you couldn't, there was not a flight out of Mali. I was stuck in Mali. You couldn't drive to the border. The military had secured all the borders. I was stuck. I didn't really feel like I was in any danger, but it's not a good feeling to know that you can't leave, And we made this record, and it was great. And then the airports opened, and I was on the first flight out. And if you asked me again, knowing what I know about the experience, would you do it? I would totally do it. It was great.
Some other artists that you mentioned a long time ago in this talk is Vic Chestnutt. And to me, he's a very underrated guy. He died a couple of years ago, right? What do you remember about recording with him? Aside from all the Leonard Cohen stuff.
Vic was a hilarious guy, and so insecure about his songs. Like, we started recording this record, and he's like, I got these songs. None of them are very good. And so we're like, Vic, just play us the songs. He's like, I don't know. No, and he'd start playing something, that's shitty. And we were all in the studio and he was there, we're just like, Vic, just play it. Shut up, play the song. And he would just, song after song, would just slay you with how awesome they were, and how touching they were, and how poetic they were. And, that record, the second record that we did with Vic, which was called At the Cut, I think I have this theory about recording, that a record is the sum of three parts: the songs, how they are played in studio, and how they are recorded. And all the ducks lined up on that record. Like, it was just, the content was amazing. The people who played on that record, most of them were in Mount Zion, and Guy Picciotto from Fugazi came. And they were just, everyone was just at the height of their powers, and Vic just felt so loved and supported by them. And we were also honored to work with Vic. And that record really like fulfills that theory, sort of just knocks it out of the park, that if all those ducks line up, it's just a great record.
Why don't we take a quick listen to one of the songs from that? This is Flirted With You All My Life. You said Vic was kind of almost reticent to play you songs. As a engineer, producer, in the studio, how much of a psychologist role do you play?
Every session is different, but having a skill set of being a psychologist or a cheerleader or a babysitter or a guru or a meditation instructor, those are all skills that I can say I've used, some even in the same session. Vic felt really intimidated by, he was just like, it was really funny because he couldn't believe that all these people, that he got to make a record with all these people, and we couldn't believe we got to make a record with Vic. Interestingly enough, so the first day that everyone landed, we went to the studio and he played all these songs acoustically, and we made the whole record and mixed the whole record. And then we finished with 2 hours to go, which never happens. You never have extra time at the studio. And then I can't remember, it might have been Guy or Jessica said, let's listen to the record. So I was like, let's set up speakers in the tracking room. And everyone sat in the exact same seat that they were sitting a few months before when Vic played the songs. And Vic was even in the same spot. And we listened to this finished record. And everyone got super choked up that these songs went from these shy little ideas to a record. It was really incredible.
You talked a lot about, you're a meditation guru, you're a producer, you're an engineer, you're a lot of different things. What, if you had to describe what you do to someone, what would you choose?
Actually what I would choose is, and I recorded this band, Sons of an Illustrious Father, who actually credited me as such, which is musical midwife, is what I feel like is the most apt description of, it's like, I've been in this situation a lot. I've seen a lot of babies come out. They're not my babies. It's not my job to name them, tell you what you should name them. I'm just here so that shit gets out of hand. I've been down this road. And we're gonna do it holistically. We're not gonna do it with a lot of intervention. I am your musical midwife. But really, the talk of are you an engineer? Are you a producer? Really, it's just about how much money you make, and people when you're engaged, they're like, well, are you this or are you that? And I was like, look, I don't know what to tell you. I know that I'm the only person you need in the studio from the beginning of the process to the end. I can record this. I can tell you if some of your songs are similar and that you should ditch this one because this one says the same thing as that one, but this one's a little better. Or, no, we don't need another guitar part, or yes, we do need a backup vocal. I can mix your record. You don't need to hire anyone else. I can make your record. The most successful records that I've made, having said that, are ones where the band is incredibly self-directed, where bands have a very strong identity of themselves, and they don't need that much intervention. I love to make records that only the people who are in that room could make. So it's not oh, this record sounds like anyone could have made this record, and it does sound like 100 other records. I like to record bands that if you change one person in the band, one variable, that record would not sound the way it does.
Was that what it was like with this Sons of an Illustrious Father?
Yeah, Sons of an Illustrious Father, this sort of fell in my lap. Actually, they loved that Vic Chestnutt record. Of all the records I recorded, they're like, that Vic Chestnutt record. And they're these sweet people from New York. Lila, Josh, and Ezra. Ezra being Ezra Miller, who is now The Flash. So I can say I know The Flash, which is kind of a nice thing in case I get in trouble.
He's an actor.
He's an actor, yeah. They're just wonderful people. They embrace everything that I would want to embrace if I was in a band. They're political, they're gentle, they're humble. And it was just a fantastic record to make. How did we get on the subject of this band? There was a question.
They called you a musical midwife.
They called me a musical midwife, yeah. But there was another question, I think, that was about this.
Yeah.
Anyhow, it's a fantastic record. It came and went. It's really sad. It just kind of got lost in the... I mean, we live in a very oversaturated time. You know, there's a lot of music being made. And I really...
It must be really odd from your perspective to be sitting in, you know, a studio feeling like we killed that one. Like that record's going to be the one. And then for it to come out and for it to not hit the right audience or something. Because you intimately know.
Every step of making that Sons of an Illustrious Father record, I was like, this record is going to be an important record. It's going to be a record that a lot of people like. It has all the trappings of being a really important record, like Neutral Milk, Airplane Over the Sea record is just such a special record. And you really got the feeling like that Neutral Milk record was only a record that those people could make. And the Sons of an Illustrious Father record, I thought, this is only a record that these people can make. And they're such interesting people. And it really felt like, when it came out, I really felt sad that it didn't catch. I felt really paternal about that record. And I feel that I don't feel it that strongly very often about a record.
Why don't we take a listen to a little bit of one of those songs and then open it up to questions after that? That was Conquest by Sons of an Illustrious Father. Do we have any questions? Does anyone want to kick it off?
I have a question, which is, will all of you accompany me home and just applaud every time I put on a piece of music? Because I think it really intensifies and ameliorates the listening experience.
You said earlier in the beginning of the lecture that sometimes the bands with 6 or 8 people, like you said, it was kind of a nightmare to have them all record in the same room. Did you ever take a wall of sound approach like Phil Spector with it? Were there any bands that ever asked for that, or did you ever want to do that on your own accord?
Yeah, I mean, that sort of happened by default. Recording a band like Godspeed, for instance, who were 8 or 9 people with more than one amplifier for each person, you just get, a microphone picks up 60% direct sound and 40% reflected sound, let's say. There's so much reflected sound when you do a band that's loud like that. That's just the sound of the record. You can't undo that. I do have a really fond appreciation for a lot of that Phil Spector stuff and for that just sheer bombasticness of being I can't tell what's going on. And you read the liner notes and you see people are credited oboe. I can't hear an oboe. It's just, there's so much lost. But because of that, there's a lot of tension. When you played the Baseku thing, I've recorded a few records now that derogatorily you can say are world music records. And there's just some atrocious production choices on a lot of that kind of music. It sounds like figure skating music to me. Everything's super neat and super cleanly recorded, and there's this weird, shitty digital reverb. And I don't understand it. And so then I get to record Baseku, or this band Black Ox Orchestre, who are klezmer music. And in the room, everything is so loud, and to me, it sounds like it's the music of rebellion. It's like punk rock. So why isn't it recorded that way? Why isn't sound bouncing off the walls more? So yeah, that's kind of the answer to that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Earlier when you mentioned about how when you were in the band, you often found it quite stressful, and at times when things wouldn't go how you wanted them to or whatever, you'd get in very bad moods. And then towards the end when you spoke about taking on the sort of multiple roles as a guru and a meditation and everything like that, have there been any times when you've been the producer role, so obviously not, still with that degree of separation which prevents you from getting into a mood, but has anybody ever pissed you off, or has anything ever happened that's made you slip back into sort of that angry place?
Yes, there's two times that happens. One is I have no tolerance for anybody who thinks they're better than anybody else. And obviously musicians, there's a weird combination of insecurity and ego. And sometimes the way that manifests itself is you sort of get treated like the hired help. And I have no tolerance for that. I can't really think of any time that I've said, I don't want to do this anymore. But certainly, like, I've gone home and was like, that was a shitty day at work, and I can't wait till this session is over. But like, if you're painting someone's house and they're an asshole to you, it's still an engagement. You still have to finish a job. And then you just know the next time they ask you to paint their new house, you're like, I'm busy. And the other time that I get really, like, just enraged, and this actually happens very frequently, is almost every session I do, at some point, everyone will just look a little bummed and we'll be talking about the record label. And the music business is so predatory, and there's so little equitable engagement. And I see kids who are 20, 21, 22 who love playing in a band, and they're at a time in their life when they're permitted to not have to make a lot of money and to just have fun. And then a record label comes in and was like, your guys are amazing. We want to help you. That's bullshit. They don't want to help you. They want to make money off the backs of you. But it's flattering when you're in a band to feel like someone's paying attention to you. Someone likes you. Someone wants to offer you money for what you're doing. And more often than not, 9 times out of 10, I see the shittiest record deals being offered to people that I really care about. And so it sucks to have to say, all right, look, we're turning off the clock. You're not going to be, you will not pay for this hour because it's going to take an hour to have this conversation. I don't think you should sign this record contract. I know this is going to be a bummer, and I know that this is the last thing you want to hear, but do not sign this record contract. Or try and get them to agree to these terms instead. This happens almost every recording session I do. It's surprising, actually, how often it happens. And that gets me in a really bad mood.
What are the things you're seeing in those contracts that you could pinpoint as being very specific that might be something to look out for?
Record labels want to own masters in perpetuity. Record labels want a sunset clause that says when you leave our record label and sign to another record label, we also make 5% of all the records you sell on that label. Record labels want to get money from merchandise, from touring. This is the most fucked one, is that record labels want to be your manager too. They're like, we'll put out your records and we'll manage you. And the bands tell me this, like, isn't this great? Like, we have one person doing these 2 jobs, but they're only taking a cut of one person. I say, that's a horrible idea, because A1, the biggest responsibility of your manager is to protect you and tell the record label when they're doing a shitty job. So if the manager and the record label are the same entity, you have no protection against that. So stuff like that, it just drives me up the wall,
To be fair, you're a pretty chill guy most of the time that I've talked to you.
Thank you, Tom.
Just for the record.
Thank you.
But these are important
anger
lessons.
is internal. It's an internal silent anger, a seething silent anger.
Well, I'm glad we're getting some of that out today. Do you have a question there?
I noticed I think it was the song that was recorded in Mali, there was like a female vocal that was quite bright, but it was still really kind of yummy and not harsh ever. So do you have any like microphone or recording tips for bright female vocals that you can offer?
I mean, you have a whole spectrum of microphones, from ribbon mics, which attenuate the high end, get rid of the high end, to some condenser mics, which add high end. So really, you want to really quickly make a decision of, well, what frequencies does the source that I'm recording have too much or too little of? And then you just have to know what your microphones then will add and subtract, and just pair them right away really quick, and be open to being like, nope, that's the wrong choice. That's the wrong choice. But you know, the thing about microphones is, especially cardioids, this, and this sound totally different because of proximity effect. So the closer you speak to a microphone, the more low end you get. So oftentimes, you know, you put up a mic and you're like, it's a little shrill. Don't take 10 minutes and swap out the mic. Just say, can you just sing 2 inches closer to the mic? Or, by extension, if it's too veiled and muffled, can you stand back from the mic by 2 inches? Often placement will solve a lot of your issues, for sure.
Sorry, one more part to the question.
Sure.
Yeah, so like, do you have any specific mics that you might recommend for like still getting quite a bit of detail, but not so much kind of high mids that there's like the harshness problem?
I'm remiss to answer this question, and not because I'm being cagey, but I really feel like the parallel question is, what color should I paint my house? It's like, I need to see your house. I need to know what color your neighbor's house is. You know, so like in a record, you have the sum of a lot of parts. So let's say you were singing on 2 songs in a record. And so I can make a judgment call on your voice and what microphone sounds good on your voice when I press solo. One of the songs is super dense arrangement, and one of them is very sparse. The same microphone with the same singer might not work on the 2 songs. So really, it's just, I can't endorse one microphone for the application that you're talking about. It really is a trial and error thing. And also not sweating it too much. Like, you know, I made this realization about gear a long time ago. Like, so I was like, I'm walking along a beach, okay? And there's a bottle, and I pick up the bottle, and a genie comes out of the bottle. And the genie says, I will grant you one of these 2 wishes. Wish 1, you could spend this whole year recording only bands that you want to record. Or, wish 2, you can spend this whole year recording in any recording studio in the world with you give me a laundry list of every piece of equipment you want, and it will be in that studio. I would absolutely choose the first option. The equipment that you use really should be secondary. They're tools. You need to know how your tools to get the job done, but you know, you can hammer in a nail with a $200 hammer or like a shitty $5 hammer that came in a 100-piece toolkit that was only, you know, $200 for 100 tools. I don't embrace the notion that you need to have one specific piece of gear. I think the notion that we need specific gear comes directly from gear manufacturers who plant this seed of insecurity that unless you have these specific tools, you are not a professional. When I started recording, I went to the music store and I was like, I would like to buy that used tape machine. And the guy said, why would you want to do that when there's this ADAT machine here? ADAT is a now antiquated format where they recorded 8 tracks of digital in 16-bit on a VHS videotape. It was like $5,000. The used tape machine was $1,200. And I was like, I don't want to do that. No one's going to be recording on that in 5 years. He said, oh, you have to be competitive. I said, it's not a competition, A. And B, that's a ridiculous investment. That format has not proven itself. The tape machine has proven itself for 65 years at this point. I used that tape machine for like 12 years. I still have that tape machine. So I really feel it's important if you're a record producer or a recording engineer to not get caught up in the insecurity that you don't have what you need to do the job. I've always believed that.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions?
Hi there.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for sharing everything today. It's really interesting to hear about the approaches with the different bands. My question is more geared at the fact that I've actually always been a big fan of Albini's work as well, and I can hear some similarities in what you're getting at there. Albini really shies away from the question of artists that in this day and age are not conventional bands and maybe do not conventionally see their vision before they enter the studio. And he sort of tends to, I've heard him say that he doesn't, that's just, he doesn't want to really answer it, I guess. He feels it's not his place. But I wondered, with some of the similarities that you had and also differences, how you felt about artists who come to you with an unrealized vision, but not unrealized in the sense that they're looking for a producer, but maybe they've never had the chance to utilize the studio or thought about, maybe what I'm referencing here is artists who are self-sufficient to some extent. And I think that might include a lot of us here, and it might be interesting to sort of just riff on that as a bit of a broad question. I'm not sure if that comes through.
I think I know what you're getting at. I think the approach I've always taken in the studio is don't speak unless you're spoken to. That's an oversimplification, obviously. I hear people playing their songs, and sometimes there are things that are questionable. Sometimes it's as simple as the guitars are out of tune, and you have to point that out. Sometimes it's more complicated, like this song is way too long, it doesn't go anywhere. And I've always thought I just need to proceed very gently and just say, listen, I know this is not my song. This is what I hear. And I totally respect you if you feel like you can justify having a song that's as long as this, or as repetitive as this, or as out of tune as this. If it's important to you and you can justify it, I respect that. But here's what I'm hearing. Sometimes I'm totally wrong. Like, I've recorded records and fought for certain things and been bullheaded about it, and then deferred to the artist, because at the end of the day, it's the artist's record. And I've listened back to those records 10 years later and been like, she was right. She was absolutely right. And sometimes I listen to stuff and be like, why didn't I say something? Like, maybe I was doing this band a disservice by not saying something. So it's hard. It really is hard to know when to speak and when not to speak. Ultimately, after a few days of recording, you do feel like, look, we're all in this together. And if there's enough trust and communication, then you address some of the issues. But we've all seen photographs of ourselves and been like, why did I wear that? Or like, what's with that look on my face? And sometimes bands listen back to their records and been like, that was a horrible song, I just don't feel like I'm the gatekeeper. I read a really interesting interview with Sean Levy, who's a producer and a movie director, who actually went to my high school. He just produced Stranger Things. And he said something really interesting about directing. He said, actors just want somebody who has an answer for them. And record producers, sometimes it's the same thing. Sometimes people are just like, just tell me, is this good or not? Or just tell me, should it be faster or slower? Just tell me. Like, I need someone decisively to say something. And that's where you come in and you say, you know what, it's a little slow. But that's just me, and I've made these 400, 450 records, and they all sound different. And maybe they all sound different because I didn't intervene and I let the bands just be the bands. Like, I don't know, I don't want every record I record to have my stamp, my endorsement of like, I endorse every choice on this record, because it's not about me. So I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Are there any other questions?
I just want to address something about the tape issue and tape
Sure.
and computer. is that one of the things, I'm not going to take sides. Honestly, there's amazing things about recording to computer. There's some dangerous things about recording to computer. There's some amazing things about recording to tape. I'm not going to take sides. But one thing that is lost, I feel, is this sort of authorship that records used to be recorded in one place by one person. So Frank Sinatra would go into Capitol Record Studios, and Nelson Riddle would arrange the record, and it would be produced, it would be recorded and mixed there. And it had the authorship of being done in one place. With computer recording, the positive is you can send tracks away, and so can add a guitar in Berlin, and someone could do backup vocals in Africa, and then someone else is mixing it. But what's lost is this notion that this record was recorded in a place. You know, I record records. Now, they start at my recording studio. I'm recording the drums and the bass and the guitars, and then the band will take the tracks home to Toronto because that's where they live, and they'll spend 2 weeks recording piano and guitar, and then they'll come back and they'll do vocals, and then they'll go somewhere else to do backup vocals, and someone else will mix it. And like I listen to these records, it's like, you know, like firing squads, there's like 8 people, but one person has a bullet. And it's done that way so that all people fire. There's 7 blanks and 1 bullet, and the person who actually killed the other person doesn't know if it was them. I listen to records now, and I'm like, I don't know what I did on this record. Like, I know I was involved somehow. I think it was the drums, but I don't know what I did on this record. So I feel like, and again, not taking sides to say one is better or worse, but I feel like that's one thing that computer recording enables, is that records are made by committees now. Like, you look at the credits of people, and it's like, this person pressed spacebar on the record, and then this person, it's like insane. So that's just one thing that had come up before that I thought I would stick out there. The other thing is, like, if you ask me, like, Howard, what kind of records do you want to make?
Howard, what kind of records do you want to make?
We can just let's just cut the part of the interview out. Todd, do you have any other questions?
Howard, what kind of records do you want to make?
It's funny you asked that, Todd, because I just want to make honest records. Like, they don't have to be recorded to tape. They don't have to be recorded on Pro Tools like they were recorded on tape. They don't have to. I just want them to be honest. And that doesn't mean, like, I'm going to leave mistakes in because mistakes were made. No, I'm going to punch in. I'm going to fix the mistakes. But I want the records to express a certain honesty and have a connection with the people listening to them, in the same way that, like, you know that is that Patti Smith record Easter, the album cover, she's like looking down and her hands up in the air, and she has like sort of a little unbleached mustache, and her armpit is unshaven. Every single time I see that record cover, I just can't stop staring at it. And there's no one reason. It just engages me in looking at it. And I want to make records that are the equivalent of that. I want people to be engaged by what they're hearing. And there's a certain way that I think bands should proceed to make their records to get that end result. And for me, I know that if a record is super, super glossy, and if I can't find the humanness in it, I don't engage. I just flew to LA and back, and I listened to 2 bands repeatedly. Titus Andronicus, made a playlist of Titus Andronicus, who I think honestly is my favorite band of the past 10 years. And there's something about the intensity by which they play, and specifically the way Patrick sings, that just draws me in. It like makes me connect with the music. And the other one was Rihanna, which is super, super, the anti-record, the new one, super, super slick. But her voice is such an incredible instrument. And within all this super slickness, it's just given this place to be this incredible voice. So I think it's possible. It's not a question of like, oh, that's too slick because that was all Pro Tools, or that's real because there's mistakes and it was recorded to tape. It's just really like a connection to the listener idea.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you.